This happened about 8 years ago, around Thanksgiving, at my grandma's house. Everyone was asleep except for me. The only people in the house were my grandparents, my mom, my brother, and me. No one else. That part is important. I couldn't sleep, so I was on the computer, just mindlessly browsing. I had a small TV on, playing Adult Swim in the background. At around 4:30 a.m., I got this weird chill down my spine. You know the feeling, like someone's watching you, but you're alone. A few seconds later, I heard something that made my stomach drop. Children laughing. A boy and a girl. At first I figured it had to be the TV, but when I turned to look, Inuyasha was still on, and it was in the middle of a fight scene. No kids, no laughter. Then I checked the computer. Every possible sound output was muted. It wasn't that either. The laughter was still there, clear as day. A little boy and girl giggling somewhere behind me. I sat there frozen, trying to make sense of it. Maybe the radio in the kitchen had turned on. It was digital. Maybe it had a timer or something. I got up to check. The second I took my first step toward the door, the laughter got louder. It went from soft giggling to full-on chuckling. Then I took another step, and it got louder again. By the third step, it had escalated into belly laughs. And that's when I heard it. A baby crying. At this point, I was trying to stay rational, but my body was going cold with fear. What kind of radio show would be playing something like this at this hour? And why was it getting louder every time I moved? I took a few more steps. The laughter turned hysterical. The baby's cries became full-on wailing, like it was in pain. The sound wasn't coming from any specific direction. It was just there, surrounding me, getting louder and louder with every step I took. I kept moving toward the door, completely on autopilot, just trying to get to my mom's room across the hall. If she heard this too, it would confirm that I was not losing my mind. The last couple of steps before the doorway were unbearable. The laughter and crying had reached a deafening volume, like I was standing in front of concert speakers. It wasn't just loud, it was painful. I could feel it in my bones. I just wanted to get out of that room. I braced myself, ready to run. The second I reached the doorway, something shoved me, hard. I felt hands on my chest. Not a breeze, not a shift in air pressure. Actual hands. They pushed me backwards with enough force to make me stumble. And the moment I landed back in the room, the noise stopped. And just like that, total silence. My chest was tight, my ears were ringing, and I could barely process what had just happened. I stood there, shaking, trying to catch my breath. Then the fear hit me all at once, and I started crying. I was too scared to try leaving again, so I curled up in the armchair and forced myself to stay there until morning. I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I remember was my grandma waking me up. She took one look at me, pale and visibly shaken, and made me sleep in her bed downstairs for the rest of my stay. I never told her what happened. I never told anyone in my family, but I know what I felt. I know what I heard, and I know, without a doubt, that I was not alone in that house that night. I grew up in a small town in Tennessee, middle of nowhere, the kind of place where there's one gas station and nothing else for miles. Outside of town, there's this bridge that everybody hears stories about. Supposedly, if you sit on it late at night, you'll hear a scream. Not from far off, not from the woods, right outside your car window. People always said it was a bobcat or some other animal, but nobody ever actually saw anything. A few friends and I had known about this for years, but never really thought much of it. Then, one night, after a few beers, we decided to see for ourselves. It was stupid, but we were in our early 20s and bored. So 5 of us crammed into my buddy's old beat-up car and drove out to the bridge around 1:30 a.m. We parked dead center and killed the engine. It was one of those nights where the air felt thick, the kind of silence that presses on your ears. We rolled the windows down and just sat there. For a while, nothing happened. After about 45 minutes, we started debating whether it was all just a bunch of bullshit. Then it happened. The scream came from right outside the rear passenger window, the one facing the drop-off. It wasn't distant. It wasn't muffled. It was right there. It was long, 3 or 4 full seconds, and loud enough to shake me to my core. It sounded human, like a woman being torn apart, except it wasn't fading in or out. It started full force and stayed there until it just cut off. We all froze. I remember that distinct moment where my brain couldn't process what I had just heard. I was staring straight ahead, gripping my knees so hard that my fingers hurt. Nobody moved for a solid 5 seconds. Then my buddy in the driver's seat turned the key so hard I thought it would snap in half. The engine roared to life, and we peeled out of there, fishtailing so bad I thought we had hit the guardrail. Nobody spoke for at least 2 miles. I was shaking so badly I had to press my palms against my legs just to keep them still. One of my friends, sitting in the back, muttered something about how it wasn't a bobcat. Then he opened the door while we were still moving and puked onto the road. Another friend, the one next to him, was dead silent. When we finally stopped, we got out and just stood there, staring at the ground. Then we noticed he'd pissed himself. I don't think I've ever seen that happen to a grown man before. The craziest part, the guy who owned the car didn't even care. That's how bad it was. I've heard bobcats before. They scream, but it's choppy, broken up, almost like they're yelling in bursts. This wasn't that. It was a single, continuous scream, and it was too powerful. It did not come from an animal. It did not come from something standing on the road. It came from just outside the window of the car, but there was nothing there. We never went back. None of us ever talked about it much after that night either. I still have no explanation for what we heard, but I do know one thing. If anybody ever tells me they want to test the bridge, I tell them to leave it alone. I don't tell this story often because most people either don't believe me or they do and don't want to talk about it. But since you run a scary story channel, I figured you'd appreciate this. This happened at Meadowbrook Manor in Rochester Hills, Michigan. If you know the place, you know it's beautiful, but also eerie as hell. My buddy worked there for years, and my wife actually hosts events there. I even proposed to her on the property, so I've got a lot of history with the place. But this was different. It was a little over a year ago. My buddy was closing up after a wedding, making sure everything was cleaned and locked up. The house has a lot of weird old features, hidden staircases, doors that lead to nowhere, and a reputation for being haunted. One of the stories floating around is about a ghost they call the Caramel Apple Girl. People say she's a little girl who's been seen holding a caramel apple with peanuts I never put too much stock into it until that night. My buddy is the least dramatic, no bullshit guy I know. So when he called me that night, I knew something was up. He said he saw a little girl standing on the staircase, eating a caramel apple. He thought she was a guest kid who got left behind. He asked if she was okay, and she told him that she was lost. He told her, "Hold on, we'll find your parents. Come on down." He turned away for a second to grab his phone, and when he turned back, she was gone. Just like that. No footsteps, no sound, just gone. He ran up the stairs, checked every hallway, every room, calling out for her. Nothing. What he did find, though, were pieces of peanuts on the staircase. He's not the type of guy to get freaked out easily, but he was spooked enough to call me. I live nearby, so I drove over right away. By the time I got there, he and a couple other employees were looking through the house again, trying to make sense of it. We searched the whole place for at least 30 minutes. Every room, every hallway, even outside. No little girl, no signs of anyone. It didn't make sense. If a real kid had been there, we would have found her. Finally, we gave up and called the campus police. They showed up, took down some notes, and helped us do one last sweep before telling us to lock up. The house was empty. No signs of forced entry, nothing stolen. Just an old mansion sitting there, dead quiet. We were standing outside talking with the officers, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened, when one of the bedroom lights flicked on. We all saw it, clear as day. It was one of those rooms we had just checked. My buddy froze. The two cops just stood there, silent. Then one of them muttered, "Fuck that." Now here's the thing. These guys had heard the stories too. They knew about the place's reputation. Instead of going in, the officer called for backup. A few more campus officers showed up before they finally searched the place. And here's the weirdest part. When they went back in, the peanuts on the stairs were gone. I don't have any explanation for any of it. I saw the light turn on with my own eyes. I saw my buddy absolutely shaken, and I've never seen him like that before. The police had no real explanation either. They ended up writing it off as a false alarm, but we all knew better. After that night, my buddy stopped working alone at the Meadowbrook. I can't say I blame him. I still go there for events, but I do not stay late. And every time I pass that staircase, I catch myself looking for peanuts on the steps.